It's the 10th century and we are at the edge of the world, at least from a European perspective. In approximately 982, Erik the Red was outlawed from Iceland for 3 years due to a series of killings, and he decided to use his exile to search for the land cited earlier by someone called Gunnbjörn Ulfsson. He successfully recruited settlers, and 14 ships survived the treacherous crossing to establish the first permanent Norse colonies in Greenland. Today, we're looking at the archaeology of the island and investigating what material culture can tell us about life in Viking-age Greenland. The material remains are concentrated in two primary regions. The eastern settlement, that would have comprised approximately 250 farms, so quite large for the time, and also the western settlement, approximately 90 farmsteads. They were both on the west coast, despite the very misleading name. The Norse settlers built farmsteads using stone, wood, and of course, thick turf walls. They were up to 2 meters thick because they were designed to insulate against temperatures that could have dropped till minus 50 degrees Celsius. We have sites like Brattahlid, that would have been the site of Erik the Red's farm in the eastern settlement. It contains the ruins of a great hall and also associated buildings. Then we also have Kvalsøy. This site hosts some of the best preserved ruins, including 2 massive stone halls and also a church. We have also Gardar, that would have been the bishop's see, and also the farm beneath the sand. We don't know the Old Norse name for this one, but it was commonly abbreviated GUS, so GUS. That stands for Gården under sandet. And this is actually the farmstead I would like to talk to you about a little bit. So this was located in the western settlement of Greenland. That would have been approximately 80 kilometers from the modern-day capital of Nuuk. And it is sort of like a Nordic Pompeii because it was buried under about 1.5 meters of glacial silt, and the sand combined with the permafrost led to quite an extraordinary preservation of a lot of organic material such as leather and wood, textiles, but also hair. This site was discovered in 1990 by 2 Inuit reindeer hunters who spotted a piece of wood sticking out of the ground, and this was later identified as the beam of a loom. Then a lot of excavations took place here, and they revealed that the farm was settled in the first decades of the 11th century, so sometime between the year 1000 and 1025, and it remained occupied for about 4 centuries until its complete abandonment around the year 1400. There are also some very interesting runic ownership marks on several wooden artifacts, and these have preserved the names of 3 individuals who used to live here: Thor, Barður, and Björk. The farm under the sand is a very good example of the centralized farm layout. That would have been a Greenlandic innovation where living quarters, stables, cowsheds, and barns were moved so closely together that they appeared as a single building block. And it actually had a very clear utility. So the design allowed inhabitants to move between the rooms without actually going outside. And in this way, it would maximize heat retention in a climate where temperatures could be very, very low. The central structure was a small 3-aisled hall measuring roughly 12 by 5 meters. It featured the typical Norse layout with a central long hearth and benches along the walls, and the walls were made of turf over a wooden frame with stone foundations. What's very interesting is that archaeologists also found a well-preserved door, which was made from 3 planks of Siberian driftwood, and this was identifiable by the wormholes that were made by shipworms. And this door was lashed with whale baleen and featured a hinge made from caribou antler. Over time, the main hall was repurposed to function as a sheep shed. So, what were people doing here? Well, it turns out that the farm was a center for textile production. There is one room that contains the best preserved upright loom from the Viking Age, measuring nearly 2 meters across. Among the finds, we have 80 soapstone loom weights, spindle wheels, and spindles. The analysis of the woven cloth found at the site revealed it was made from sheep, goat, oxen fiber, but also included hair from Arctic fox, polar bear, and caribou. And some cloth was even woven from black goat hair mixed with white Arctic hair fur for, well, extra warmth. The inhabitants were also busy with livestock. They kept cattle, sheep, and goats. And among the interesting finds, we also have a whale vertebra that was used as a milking stool, or, for example, a spade fashioned from whale bone. So they really did know how to use their environment. The permafrost even preserved the nests of long haired house mice tucked between hearthstones in the weaving room. But life was far from idyllic, make no mistake. Life was a continuous struggle, especially against a deteriorating climate. As the Little Ice Age began around 1200, the climate became colder and drier. The glacier above the farm began to creep forward, turning once clear rivers, milky with sediment and drifting sand, onto the farm's pastures. The settlement seems to have quite a tragic end. Environmental analysis of floor layers indicates that the inhabitants might have starved to death. And this is suggested by a sudden rise in carrion flies, which is an outdoor species, inside the buildings during the farm's final phase. So I think you can imagine what happened to these poor people. No bodies were found at the site, though, suggesting that they were eventually removed by others, most likely to get a proper burial. And the final abandonment in itself appears to have occurred orderly. Valuables were taken, but some sheep and goats were left to run wild on the hillsides, and perhaps more chillingly, the remains of 9 hunting dogs were found beneath the collapsed roof timbers at the nearby manor of Sandnes, suggesting a similarly desperate end for the wider communities in Greenland. So, as previously mentioned, the excavations at the farm beneath the sand revealed the best preserved Viking Age upright loom ever found. But besides the textiles on this site, we have evidence from elsewhere, for example, from the graveyard at Herjosnes, which yielded a unique connection of well preserved woolen hoods and gowns. Some featured liripipe tails, like the long trail that would have been attached to a hood, and this was a sign that Greenlanders followed continental European fashion as late as the 15th century, so they were very much connected with Europe at the time. Other materials they did know how to use as well. They showed great ingenuity in using bone and stone because timber was scarce. And since Greenland had natural outcrops of soapstone, it was used to manufacture stuff like cooking pots, bowls, and lamps. Lamps were typically filled with seal oil for heat and light. In the absence of sufficient wood and metal, whale vertebrae were used as stools, whalebone was fashioned into buckles, spades, and other objects, and sometimes they did have access to wood, either imported or driftwood, and some driftwood items do survive, including tubs for skyr, that would have been the sour cheese consumed as a yogurt, also spoons, and a wooden chopping board decorated with carved walrus heads. Excavations have also recovered miniature wooden boats and horses, as well as a whalebone weaving sword that had human figures scratched onto it, perhaps repurposed as a toy. One discovery that I particularly like is that of a woven ringlet of long blonde hair found tucked in a nook in the weaving room wall. And this, I think, can be interpreted as some sort of love token. It's very nice to think about it. And other finds include bone combs, also gaming pieces, even a faulty die where the maker had inscribed the wrong numbers. You see, it is in this sort of small detail that we truly find our shared humanity across the ages. Do we have runic inscriptions in Greenland? Actually, we do. We have approximately 100 to 200 runic inscriptions identified, and these inscriptions indicate that the Scandinavian spoken on the island was of West Scandinavian type. And this was to be expected because it's consistent with the origins as an Icelandic emigrant colony. When you say runes, you usually think of the large monumental stones on the mainland, but in this case, literacy in Greenland appears more broadly distributed and focused on functional everyday use. Runic writing is applied to a vast range of materials, including wood, bone, and stone, appearing on objects such as ownership marks, like a box lid inscribed with the name Björk, or a spade marked with Gunnar owns, a spindle whorl that is marked with Sigrid made, Also, tally sticks. These show that the Greenlanders were very much preoccupied with counting and managing communities, and it's natural because there were also limited resources, so you had to write everything down. But there are also some intriguing objects, like a four-sided pinewood stick found at Narsak and dated to about 985 to 1025, that seems to feature a very sophisticated homonym wordplay about a maid named Bivrau. Now, this is a very strange one. The first sentence is baffling because it plays with the letters SA that can stand for a number of Old Norse words. For example, for the pronoun saw, meaning that one, also the past tense of the verb to see, exactly like in English, and there's also a noun saw, meaning tub, but it can also inscribe se, as in sea. There are similarities with a rune stick from Bergen, and the interpretation would be something like he who sat on a tub saw a tub, or saw es or saw sat, or something like that. There's also a more mythological approach, although I think this is a little bit of an overinterpretation. But this would go something into the direction on the sea. The sea is the ambush of the Asir. Or se es orsasot. So this basically indicates that the sea is treacherous. Then the next sentence poses problems of its own because we have this name, Bivrau, the name of the maiden who sits on Bloni. Is this a magical being of some sort? Then again, we have this word Bloni, which seems to be a dative form of Bloin, which would have been another term for Ymir, the primordial giant. Then another side of the stick appears to have cipher runes for apparently normal runes, three times A and then an L, but then continues with a repeated symbol with the appearance of a bind rune formed of K and reversed upside down K. These symbols are divided into groups with 1 point division marks. They sort of look like they have a meaning, but it's still one huge puzzle. Yeah, so whoever made this, I hope you are pleased with yourself. Runic evidence also confirms that the Norse traveled far beyond their primary settlements for hunting and exploration. The Kingitorsuak stone was found far north in the northern hunting grounds that would be at a latitude of 73 degrees north in 1824, and it states that three men by the name of Erling Sigvatsson, Bjarni Thordarson, and Eindridi Oddsson built cairns on the Saturday before Rogation Day, so at the end of April, likely after wintering in the Arctic. Some runic inscriptions also document the deaths of those lost at sea or in the wilderness. There is, for example, a rune stick found in a coffin at Heriosnes, which contained no body, by the way, and it states this woman named Gulveig was laid overboard in the Greenland Sea. Essentially, we have quite a high frequency of runic inscriptions across a wide range of mundane objects. So many of the settlers would have had functional literacy and also this constant need for accurate communication in a harsh environment like the Greenlandic one. In terms of religion, Greenland converted to Christianity around the year 1000, although archaeological remains do tend to show a little bit of a blend of piety and lingering folk practices. The wife of Erik the Red, Theodhild, had a church, a tiny one, 2 by 3.5 meters. It's a turf-walled oratory built near Brattahlid, and it has an associated cemetery as well with about 140 graves. It was built out of sight of Erik's pagan farmstead because, yeah, on that account, they did not really see eye to eye. Then there's the remains of Gardar Cathedral and the nearby large byre, and the Kvalsøy with thick stone walls originally painted white, so probably would have looked beautiful. And you can also find ecclesiastical artifacts, such as a 13th century bishop's grave at Gardar with a gold ring and a crozier carved from walrus ivory, perhaps the most prestigious Arctic export. And like I said, due to permafrost, we also have some interesting discoveries in terms of medieval European clothing at the graveyard at Heriosnes. So Greenland, despite being so far away, did remain in close contact, part of the European Christian world. We do have some interesting pagan elements as well. One can be found in the saga of Erik the Red, Erik Saga Rauða. This one describes a detailed sorcery ritual, a seidr, performed by a seeress called Thorbjörg during a Greenlandic famine. This is actually the most detailed one we have, and much of the description seems to find reflection in some sorceresses' graves, potential ones. For example, the one in Firket in Denmark. But the story overall seems to be a remnant of distant paganism in the mind of the Icelandic Christian author who is actually writing about it. A much clearer piece of pagan religious evidence found in Greenland is a whetstone from Brattahlid with a small Thor's hammer carved onto it. Perhaps more interesting is that at the Gardar Cathedral site, archaeologists found 20 to 30 walrus skulls with their teeth extracted, and they were buried in and around the church, which doesn't really shout Christianity if you think about it. I suppose the strange arrangement might suggest that mystic or ritualistic ideas might have been attached to these animals because, in the end, they were absolutely essential to the colony's economy. We already mentioned the primary export, walrus ivory. This was highly prized in Europe for art and ecclesiastical objects. For example, in 1327 alone, the Greenland Sea paid tithes equivalent to roughly 500 walrus tusks, a sum estimated to be worth more than 780 cows. Greenlanders also exported narwhal tusks. They were often sold as unicorn horns. Also, live polar bears, falcons, walrus hide ropes, and furs such as Arctic fox and bear. These items were frequently used as diplomatic gifts for European prelates and princes because, yeah, they would have been very exotic at the time. In return, they imported grain for flour and malt, also iron, timber, salt, but also some luxurious textiles. Even as the colony declined, finds like the ones at Heliosnes show that they continued to import such garments in the 15th century because they were still trying to maintain this sustained contact with the continent. The Norse encountered two distinct indigenous groups. They called the Skrællingar, which was not really an endearing term. It would have meant something like barbarians, the Dorset Paleo Eskimos, and later the Thule Inuit. Evidence of interaction is found primarily in the form of Norse metal, like fragments of iron, copper, and bronze recovered from Thule sites, which were likely reworked into tools. Other finds include fragments of chain mail, woolen cloth, and even a Norse ivory chess piece found in one of the Inuit settlements. While sagas and annals occasionally record hostile clashes, oral traditions and certain finds, such as a bronze balance arm found on Ellesmere Island, suggest a degree of, let's call it, cautious trade. A Labrador quartzite arrowhead found in a Norse graveyard at Sandnes also provides some evidence of contact, though it remains debated whether it represents trade or more violent encounters. After all, Greenland served as the primary base for voyages to Markland and Vinland, so Labrador and Newfoundland. Such an expedition would be driven by a need for resources lacking in Greenland, specifically lumber, and we do actually have textual records confirming that Greenlanders were still sailing to Markland for timber as late as 1347. We also have traces of a buffalo hide robe, the buffalo being a native animal to the North American interior, that was found in a grave at Sandnes, and this suggests that the Norse might have participated in or at least benefited from a broader indigenous trading network that would have extended far into the American continent. And speaking of traveling, a potential Viking-age navigational instrument was also unearthed in Greenland, the Unartok dial. This is a semicircular wooden fragment which, if complete, would likely be divided into 32 sections marked by triangles carved around the edge. It features a hole in the center, which might have been intended for a pin or a gnomon, a shaft that acted like a shadow pin, and perhaps a movable pointer to mark a course. Specific notches at right angles to one another are emphasized by scratches, possibly representing the cardinal points of north and west. A navigator could align the dial with the sun at noon or the pole star at night to see all points of the compass at a glance and thus adjust the ship's prow accordingly. On the other hand, this is heavily debated because such a device would require advanced knowledge of varying sun angles at different seasons and latitudes, and we're not really sure if Viking Age people actually possess that kind of knowledge. So that was it. Really hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to find out what happened to the Norse Greenlanders, there is also a piece about that on the channel. Please do consider supporting the project with a membership or a donation so that I can create more materials and provide more quality public research. Thank you so much. This was Irina. Take care and until next time.